And we thank God for the calling that we have received, not just individually, but as one community.
It began with a single sentence, an announcement that stunned the world. Pope Francis had died just hours after appearing during one of the most sacred weekends in the Christian calendar. The Vatican confirmed his passing after a battle with pneumonia and a lung infection. The news sent shockwaves through the Catholic community and beyond. For many, it marked the end of a papacy defined by humility, social justice, and quiet but significant reforms. But in the days following his death, something unexpected emerged. Something that would shift the conversation from mourning to mystery. A letter. Not just any letter, but a handwritten message from Pope Francis himself. The contents were private, and the letter was not widely known. In fact, some within the Vatican had believed it never even existed. Others thought it had been lost to time, buried somewhere in the vast archives of the Holy See. Then, quietly and without much ceremony, it appeared. The letter was addressed to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a name familiar to those who follow Vatican affairs, but not necessarily a household name around the world. He's a Filipino cardinal, respected for his deep faith, soft-spoken nature, and strong connection to the people he serves. The Pope and Cardinal Tagle had worked closely over the years, and many in the Vatican knew they shared a mutual respect. Still, the existence of a personal letter from the Pope to Tagle, discovered only after Francis's death, sparked instant speculation. Why was it written? Why had it remained hidden until now? And most importantly, what did it say? The timing of the letter's discovery raised even more questions. Was this just a farewell message from a spiritual leader to someone he trusted? Or was it something more? Some believed it was an intentional move by Pope Francis, a message meant to be found only after his passing, a quiet, calculated way to offer direction during a time when the Church would be facing uncertainty. After all, the Catholic Church, with its more than 1.3 billion followers around the world, was about to enter a new chapter. A chapter without Francis at the helm. The circumstances surrounding the letter's discovery were, by all accounts, unusual. According to sources inside the Vatican, the document had been tucked away in a private section of the archives. It wasn't stored alongside official decrees or church announcements. Instead, it was placed among more personal items, notes, letters, reflections the Pope had written during his years in office. When archivists came across it, they recognized its significance almost immediately. Handwritten in Pope Francis's distinct style, the letter was not formal in tone. It didn't contain specific instructions or clear declarations. It wasn't a decree or an official appointment. It was, in many ways, something more intimate, a message filled with trust, reflection, and perhaps subtle direction. Reports from those who've seen the letter say it included a line that stood out above all the rest. "I entrust you to carry forward the spirit of service." A sentence that might appear simple on its surface, but within the context of the Catholic Church's traditions carried enormous weight. Entrusting someone, especially in the language of the Vatican, is rarely just symbolic. It's often seen as a sign of confidence, a personal passing of responsibility, even if not an official one. Naturally, speculation grew. Could this be Pope Francis's way of pointing to a future leader? Could this letter be his subtle endorsement of Cardinal Tagle, a man he had mentored for years? Or was it simply the expression of a close bond, nothing more than a heartfelt farewell from one spiritual leader to another? At the center of this unfolding story is a broader question. What happens when a pope dies without clearly naming a successor? By Catholic tradition, popes don't choose who comes next. The decision lies with the College of Cardinals, who gather in a secretive conclave to cast their votes. But influence can take many forms. And while Pope Francis may not have named a successor outright, many believe he spent his final years shaping the future of the Church in quieter ways. Through mentorship, trust, and the careful placement of individuals in key roles. Cardinal Tagle, over the last decade, has become one of the most prominent figures in the Vatican. Appointed by Pope Francis to lead the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples in 2019, Tagle has played a major role in shaping how the Church interacts with communities around the world. He's traveled extensively on behalf of the Vatican, spoken out on issues like poverty and migration, and has become known for his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. He also shares many of the values Pope Francis championed during his time as pontiff: a belief in serving the poor, a commitment to humility and leadership, an openness to reform and dialogue. For those who admired Francis's approach to leadership, Tagle represents a continuation of that path. For those who were critical, he may represent more of the same. The letter's discovery at such a sensitive time has only deepened the divide. Inside Vatican walls, sources say reactions have been mixed. Some see the letter as a natural extension of Pope Francis's leadership style: humble, indirect, and deeply personal. Others are more skeptical, questioning whether a personal letter should carry any weight in the larger, more formal process of electing a new pope. But whatever the intentions behind the letter, its impact is undeniable. It has ignited conversations within the Church and among the faithful. It has brought Cardinal Tagle into the spotlight in a way few expected. And it has added a layer of intrigue to what is already a pivotal moment for the Catholic Church. This isn't the first time a personal document from a pope has stirred debate. In the past, letters, diaries, and even informal conversations have played roles, sometimes quietly influencing major decisions. But in this case, the timing, the subject, and the tone of the letter have combined to make it something more than just a footnote. To understand the importance of the letter Pope Francis left behind and why it's drawn so much global attention, we need to take a step back. Not to the moment the letter was discovered, but to the years that led up to it. Because this wasn't just a message between colleagues, it was the product of a relationship built on shared values, trust, and time. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, often referred to simply as Chito by those who know him well, is one of the most recognizable Catholic figures in the Philippines and has become increasingly known in global church circles. He was born in Manila in 1957 and raised in a modest working-class environment. His upbringing was deeply influenced by his family's faith and by the everyday struggles of the people around him. His early life was marked not by privilege but by a sense of closeness to ordinary people, the kind of closeness that would go on to shape his entire approach to leadership. What set Tagle apart early on was his ability to connect with people. Parishioners and clergy alike describe him as approachable, kind, and thoughtful. He's often seen laughing with children or listening intently to those who come to him with worries or doubts. His homilies are not filled with grand theological declarations, but instead focus on practical compassion, hope, and humility. For Tagle, the Church has always been more than a hierarchy. It's a community. It's this approach that caught the attention of Pope Francis. From their first meetings, those close to both men observed an almost immediate bond. It wasn't just about shared backgrounds, though both men came from humble beginnings, far from the traditional centers of Catholic power in Europe. It was about a shared vision. Both men believed that the Church should serve, not rule, that leaders should listen before they speak, and that the mission of the Church should be focused on walking alongside the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. Pope Francis, who was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, has long spoken about the dangers of clericalism and the need for a more pastoral church, one that is less concerned with ceremony and more focused on mercy. This is the same ethos that has defined Tagle's public ministry. For Francis, Tagle represented not only a theological ally, but a kindred spirit, a man who didn't chase status or titles, but who instead pursued understanding and service. Over the years, Pope Francis gave Tagle increasing responsibilities within the Vatican. These weren't simply administrative roles. They were strategic appointments that placed him in the heart of some of the Church's most important and sensitive areas. In 2015, Francis appointed Tagle as president of Caritas Internationalis, the Church's global charitable network. Then, in 2019, he was made prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a department often referred to as the Vatican's missionary arm. That role wasn't just about overseeing missionary work. It was about guiding how the Church presents itself in the world, how it engages with new cultures, emerging communities, and developing nations. It put Tagle in a powerful position to influence the Church's future, especially in parts of the world where Catholicism is growing rapidly, such as Asia and Africa. These appointments didn't go unnoticed. Vatican observers began to wonder if Pope Francis was quietly grooming Tagle for something more. Not in the sense of handpicking a successor, that's not how the Catholic Church works, but in the sense of shaping a legacy through people who shared his values. And in that light, every move began to take on new meaning. Tagle was invited to major global gatherings, accompanied Francis on key trips, and became a frequent voice in discussions around church reform, social justice, and interfaith dialogue. His visibility within the Vatican grew, and so did the speculation. What made their relationship particularly noteworthy was how unforced it appeared. While other figures in the church sometimes position themselves carefully for advancement, Tagle never seemed to do so. He didn't lobby for attention, nor did he comment on speculation around his future. Instead, he remained focused on his pastoral mission, traveling, listening, and serving communities around the world. There's a quiet confidence in Tagle that mirrors Pope Francis's own style. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the most consistent, the most compassionate, the most present. And over time, those qualities have earned him deep respect, not just from Francis, but from many others in the church hierarchy. In fact, some cardinals have commented privately on the unique nature of their bond. One was quoted saying, "Francis sees in Tagle a mirror of his own heart." That's not a small thing. In an institution as old and structured as the Catholic Church, personal connections often speak louder than formal statements. Trust isn't given lightly. It's earned over years of shared mission and mutual understanding. For Pope Francis, who had spent much of his papacy pushing the Church toward openness, dialogue, and humility, Tagle offered something rare, a leader who could carry that vision forward not because he was instructed to, but because it was already his own. That's what makes the letter so significant. It wasn't an order, it was a recognition, a signal that Pope Francis believed in Tagle not as a successor in title, but as someone who could be a spiritual continuation of the path he had begun. When people discuss influence in the Vatican, they often focus on documents, declarations, or doctrinal changes, but sometimes the most powerful messages are unspoken, or written in quiet, personal ways. A letter, handwritten and heartfelt, can say more than a public announcement ever could. Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle had more than a professional relationship. They had a shared belief in what the Church could be, an institution rooted in mercy, grounded in the gospel, and present in the lives of its people. That's why this letter, though it may never be formally acknowledged as a directive, has struck such a deep chord. It speaks to something bigger than succession. It speaks to legacy. For a pope who consistently rejected grandeur in favor of simplicity, who lived in a guest house instead of the apostolic palace, who chose simple white vestments over elaborate robes, who asked people to pray for him rather than cheering his arrival, this kind of letter makes sense. It fits with the man and the mission. Quietly, subtly, but clearly, it points to someone he trusted to carry on his work. One of the key lines that stood out was this: "The Church does not belong to those who seek power. It belongs to those who serve." That sentence, simple as it may seem, echoes one of the defining principles of Pope Francis's papacy. He consistently spoke out against clericalism, the idea that the Church is ruled from the top down by a privileged few. Instead, he pushed for a church that listens more than it speaks, one that walks alongside the people it serves. This message was central to the letter. Sources close to the Vatican say the Pope didn't use the letter to give Cardinal Tagle instructions. Rather, he offered guidance. He shared reflections, offered encouragement, and gently reminded Tagle of the values they both held dear: compassion, humility, mercy, and service. Another sentence that drew attention was this one: "Luis, you understand the hearts of the people. Never lose that. The future needs leaders who carry mercy in both hands." To many, this felt like a personal affirmation, almost like a father figure recognizing the strengths of a son. It wasn't about qualifications or theological knowledge. It was about heart, about empathy, about leading not with authority, but with humanity. Observers have noted that this type of language is consistent with how Francis has always communicated. Whether in speeches, homilies, or interviews, he has never been one for formality for the sake of formality. He has always preferred sincerity over status, so it makes sense that even in his final private messages, his focus would be on the heart of leadership, not the structure of it. Still, the letter has stirred considerable discussion, because even though it doesn't explicitly name Cardinal Tagle as a successor, the subtext is hard to ignore. For a pope to say to someone, "I entrust you to carry forward the spirit of service," carries more than emotional weight. In the context of the Vatican, where language is often carefully chosen and deeply symbolic, that kind of phrase can be seen as a spiritual endorsement. What makes this even more significant is that Pope Francis didn't just write this letter in passing. According to insiders, the letter was written with intent and placed in a location where it would be found after his death. That has led many to believe the Pope timed its discovery deliberately, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a thoughtful way of offering guidance when it might be needed most. It's worth noting that the Catholic Church doesn't work like a political organization. There are no campaigns, no public endorsements, and no succession plans laid out in writing. When a pope dies or resigns, it's the College of Cardinals who gather in a conclave to vote on his successor. That process is closed to the public and guided by prayer and deliberation. Still, it's widely acknowledged that a pope can shape the Church's future through relationships, appointments, and quiet influence. And many believe this letter is an example of that influence. But this letter wasn't just about the person it was addressed to. It also touched on broader challenges facing the Church today. Poverty, migration, and environmental care were all mentioned, according to early reports. These are issues Pope Francis consistently championed during his time as leader of the Catholic Church. He believed the Church had a responsibility not just to preach, but to act, to defend the poor, welcome the stranger, and care for the planet. In referencing these issues in the letter, Francis may have been reminding Tagle, and the Church more broadly, that its mission doesn't end with tradition. It must remain alive in the world. It must respond to suffering, engage with global challenges, and never forget the people it serves. This emphasis on a church that listens and adapts has been a hallmark of Francis's leadership, but it has also drawn criticism from more conservative voices within the Church. Some have argued that his focus on social justice has come at the expense of doctrine and discipline. Others believe his approach has opened the Church to confusion about its identity and teachings. This tension between tradition and reform has created a divide within the Church, one that is still very present today. And it's part of what makes this letter so powerful. Because in affirming Cardinal Tagle's strengths, Francis also reaffirmed the direction he hoped the Church would continue to move in. But not everyone agrees on what the letter means. Some believe it was simply a private note, a personal expression of love and trust from a mentor to his protege. They caution against reading too much into it or treating it as a sign of succession. Others, however, argue that the letter is rich with symbolic meaning, and that it reflects Francis's true hopes for the Church's future, hopes he may not have been able to express publicly in his final months. The reality is that both interpretations may be true. The letter can be both personal and symbolic. It can be a farewell and a roadmap, and that's part of what makes it so compelling. Because in the Catholic Church, meaning is often found not just in what is said, but in how and when it is said. According to a close friend, when asked privately about the letter, Tagle simply said, "I am just a servant of God." That response might seem understated, even vague, but for those who know him, it says everything. Tagle has always led with humility, even in moments when the spotlight found him. While some leaders might treat such a letter as a symbol of power or a sign of elevation, Tagle's reaction suggested he saw it as a reminder of responsibility, not prestige. His quiet response didn't stop the speculation. If anything, it added to it. The lack of a public statement created space for interpretation, by church officials, by the media, and by millions of Catholics around the world. And in the absence of clear answers, the debate has intensified. Inside the Vatican, the letter has sparked more than just curiosity. It has ignited a quiet but real divide. Many church officials have welcomed the letter's message, seeing it as a continuation of Pope Francis's legacy. Progressive cardinals, younger clergy members, and a large number of Catholic communities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have voiced their support for the values reflected in the letter. compassion, service, openness, and dialogue. For these groups, Tagle represents a type of leadership that aligns with the modern needs of the Church. They see in him a voice that understands both tradition and change. He comes from a part of the world where Catholicism is growing, not shrinking. He speaks multiple languages, engages with global issues, and has worked closely with humanitarian organizations. More importantly, he speaks directly to the people. He doesn't hide behind titles or structures. He listens. And in today's world, where trust in institutions is low and many feel disconnected from traditional authority, that ability to listen matters more than ever. But not everyone shares this view. Within the Vatican, there is also resistance. Some conservative factions have expressed concern over what they see as a gradual shift away from the Church's historic foundations. To them, the rise of figures like Tagle signals a move towards a more progressive, less structured version of Catholicism. They worry about what this means for doctrinal consistency and the Church's long-standing traditions. And the fact that this letter surfaced right after Pope Francis's death only adds to their unease. Several sources inside the Vatican say that private meetings have already taken place, with some cardinals discussing the next conclave and the future direction of the Church. While there are no official campaigns, at least not publicly, there are quiet conversations, alliances being formed, and ideological lines being drawn. Those who align with Pope Francis's vision are looking for ways to ensure it continues. Those who oppose it are looking for ways to slow or reverse the momentum. This kind of internal division isn't new. Pope Francis himself faced pushback throughout his papacy. His approach to leadership, less focused on formal power and more on moral authority, challenged some of the existing structures. His willingness to speak out on topics like climate change, economic inequality, migration, and abuse within the Church made him a figure of hope for many, but also a source of discomfort for others. And now with Francis gone, that tension has only grown more visible. The letter to Tagle has become a symbol in that struggle, not just a personal note, but a focal point for the Church's ongoing identity crisis. What kind of institution should the Catholic Church be in the 21st century? Should it hold tightly to its past, or open itself more fully to the future? Should it preserve tradition at all costs, or adapt in order to stay relevant and meaningful to a changing world? For some, the idea of Cardinal Tagle stepping into greater leadership, whether officially or unofficially, represents a continuation of change they're not ready for. His work in social justice, his openness to interfaith dialogue, and his efforts to address the challenges of modern society are seen by critics as a departure from what they consider the core of Catholic teaching. For them, faith should be preserved exactly as it has been, not adjusted in response to cultural or political trends. Others argue the opposite. They believe that without adapting, the Church risks losing its ability to connect with the people it claims to serve. They point to declining church attendance in parts of Europe and North America, scandals that have damaged trust, and a new generation that is more diverse, more connected, and less tolerant of outdated structures. In this view, Tagle's leadership style, a blend of empathy, faith, and modern engagement, offers a path forward. But for Tagle himself, the debate is not one he appears eager to join. He remains publicly quiet, continuing his work with charitable organizations and global church efforts. He's been seen visiting migrant communities, participating in faith dialogues, and addressing youth gatherings, not from a stage of authority, but from the ground, often face-to-face with those he serves. This consistency in his behavior has not gone unnoticed. For many, it only strengthens the perception that Tagle is a leader formed not by ambition, but by calling. And it also explains why Pope Francis might have chosen to write to him in the way he did. The letter wasn't a reward. It wasn't a strategy. It was a moment of trust, a gesture of quiet belief in someone who has shown, time and again, that leadership isn't about control. It's about carrying the weight of others. Still, the impact of the letter is very real. Whether or not Tagle ever speaks about it publicly, the message has already traveled far. It has sparked hope in some corners of the Church and concern in others. And it has made one thing clear: the Catholic Church is at a crossroads. With more than 1.3 billion followers around the world, the Church faces enormous responsibility. Its influence stretches across continents and cultures, and its future depends on the decisions made in these uncertain times. The next conclave, whenever it happens, will not just select a new pope. It will set the tone for what kind of church the world will see in the years to come. And now, many are asking the same question. If Cardinal Tagle were to take on greater leadership, what kind of church would he help shape? To begin to answer that, it helps to understand how Tagle has led throughout his career. His focus has always been on people, especially those often left out of traditional narratives. From street children in Manila to migrant workers across Southeast Asia, Tagle has consistently placed the most vulnerable at the center of his ministry. His speeches don't focus on doctrine as much as they do on dignity. He speaks of faith not just as a belief system, but as something that must live and breathe in the daily struggles of ordinary people. In one of his earlier homilies, Tagle said, "Faith must live where people live, in their struggles, in their hopes, in their pain." That statement alone offers a clear sense of the direction he might take the church if given the opportunity. A church that listens, a church that stands with the marginalized, a church that embraces its role not just as a spiritual guide, but as a moral voice in a deeply complicated world. In many ways, that philosophy mirrors Pope Francis's. Throughout his papacy, Francis worked to redefine what church leadership looks like. He rejected grand displays of power, chose to live in a modest guest house instead of the papal palace, and regularly visited prisons, refugee camps, and impoverished communities. He made it clear that the role of the church is not to sit above the world, but to walk with it. And Tagle appears to share that vision completely. If Tagle were to step into a larger leadership role, whether as Pope or as a continuing influence behind the scenes, the church would likely become more outward-facing. It would engage more directly with social justice, with climate change, with migration, and with the economic inequalities that divide societies. These are issues Tagle has spoken about for years, and they align closely with the broader direction set during Francis's time. Under Tagle, the church could also become more inclusive. He has often called for deeper listening, especially to those who feel forgotten or pushed aside by traditional religious structures. This includes not only the poor, but also the young, the questioning, and those who feel alienated by institutional religion. Tagle doesn't speak in absolutes. Instead, he speaks of empathy and dialogue, and of finding common ground in a world that often feels divided by ideology and fear. This approach, while inspiring to many, will also come with challenges. Change in the Catholic Church is slow and often met with resistance. While Tagle's values align with much of what Pope Francis advocated, not everyone in the Church agrees with that path. As we've already seen, there are strong voices within the Vatican who prefer a more traditional approach, one that focuses more heavily on doctrine, hierarchy, and established customs. For Tagle, navigating that tension would be a delicate task. Balancing the need for reform with respect for tradition is never easy. It means listening not just to the people who are calling for change, but also to those who fear losing what they hold sacred. And it means doing so with patience, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose. But if anyone is capable of walking that line, it might be Cardinal Tagle. Those who have worked with him say he's not only emotionally intelligent, but also politically aware. He understands how the Vatican functions, how decisions are made, and how influence moves quietly through conversations, relationships, and shared values. In that sense, he's not an outsider to the system. He's someone who understands it deeply, but chooses to engage with it from a place of service rather than ambition. There's also the global perspective to consider. The Catholic Church is no longer centered solely in Europe. Today, the largest growth in Catholic populations is happening in regions like Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Tagle, as a Filipino cardinal, embodies that shift. His background gives him insight into cultures, languages, and challenges that many European cardinals may not be as familiar with. And his ability to communicate across those differences could be essential in a church that aims to be truly global. Then there's the question of youth. One of the ongoing concerns in the church has been the disconnect between young people and institutional religion. Many young Catholics feel disillusioned or disengaged, uncertain of where they fit within a structure that sometimes seems distant or out of touch. Tagle, however, has made a point of engaging with young people directly. He's active in youth gatherings, open to modern communication platforms, and has a reputation for being approachable and open-minded. His focus isn't on modernizing for the sake of trendiness, but on relevance, on making sure that the church continues to speak to people where they are, not where it used to be. This could prove vital for the church's future. As new generations grow up in a world shaped by rapid change, uncertainty, and digital connection, they'll look for leaders who are present, responsive, and willing to meet them in real conversation. Tagle has already shown he is capable of doing exactly that. Of course, no single leader can transform an institution as large and complex as the Catholic Church on their own. But what leaders can do is shape the culture, one decision at a time, one message at a time. They can plant seeds that grow over years, and they can offer a tone that others begin to echo. That's what Pope Francis did, and that's what many believe Cardinal Tagle could continue. It's also what makes the letter so powerful even now. Not because it officially names a successor, but because it speaks to a larger legacy. A legacy of leadership defined not by control, but by compassion, by service, by the belief that faith should never be a wall, but a bridge. Pope Francis once said, "The greatest leaders don't seek power, they prepare others to lead." That line may be one of the clearest reflections of what this letter truly represents. It's not a political move, it's not about strategy or ambition, it's about one leader recognizing another, quietly and sincerely, and offering a message of trust. As the Church faces enormous questions about its future, how it responds to crisis, how it connects across cultures, how it stays relevant without losing its roots, letters like this one serve as a kind of compass. A reminder that the path forward doesn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's about doing the quiet work, about showing up, about leading with love, even when no one is watching. Whether Cardinal Tagle becomes the next pope or continues to guide the Church in other ways, his influence is already being felt. Through his actions, his humility, and now through the words of a pope who clearly believed in him, he represents a vision of what the Church can be. Gentle yet strong, rooted yet open, humble yet unafraid to lead. And in the end, maybe that's the real message behind Pope Francis's final note. Not just that he saw a future leader in Tagle, but that he believed the Church could move forward by holding on to its deepest values while also embracing the needs of the present. A Church not frozen in time, but one that evolves with grace. For many, that hope is enough to believe that even in silence, even in the quiet handing over of a single letter, something powerful has already begun.